Friends, brothers, gentlemen, countrymen, welcome to another episode of Happy Hour by Purpose on Tap. My name is Stan Johnson. I'm excited to get to host this podcast. Today's episode is a really special one with a guy named Randy Walton. He's a author, consultant, just businessman extraordinaire. You're going to get to hear all of that in this conversation. He's written a new book called Hidden in Plain Sight, which is about communication. It doesn't matter what stage of life you're in. He comes at it from a business perspective, but there's so much application into every aspect of our life, whether you're single, whether you're married, whether you're a dad as well. Listen to this. There's so many enlightening things that I think you're going to learn. I'm really excited to have Randy Walton with us on this episode of Happy Hour, brought to you by Purpose on Tap. This is going to be a really cool episode, a really cool conversation that we're going to really dig into this idea of communication. Randy's written a new book called Hidden in Plain Sight that I'm working through right now, but it's been an awesome read. Selfishly, Randy is a friend. I would consider him somebody that I look up to. And so thank you for joining today. And we've shared some great meals together, and I love picking his brain. And so I think there's a lot that you'll hear today that will be really cool. Before I ask you to go a little bit deeper into the book, Randy, you're a speaker, you're a consultant, leadership expert. You run a really great organization called the Walton Group. Tell us a little bit about that and also what you do.
Wow, that's a loaded question. I mean, I can't answer that question in most social settings that I'm in. What do you do? I don't know. If you ask my wife, she couldn't tell you.
Are you still trying to figure out what you want to be when you grow up?
Absolutely. I'm still trying to decide if I want to grow up.
Okay.
Essentially what I do is I am a consultant at heart, and that takes a number of different forms. A lot of what I do is really mentoring and working with and advising senior leaders in organizations as they navigate complicated situations. Big part of what we do also is we help larger family-owned organizations as they navigate through the process of should that be an internal family succession and leadership? Should we sell that company and allow the next generation of family to repurpose their interests? A lot of questions as it relates to how you build a company that gives you a lot of choices and options,
Okay.
and then how do you exercise those options wisely? And then the last part of what we do at the Walton Group is a lot of work around boards and board governance,
Okay.
advising organizations how to establish healthy boards, manage the complications of board governance kinds of questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
The serious stuff. Tell us about, so there's something else I read on your website, is that you're a certified exit planner.
Yeah.
What is an exit planner?
Well, it's a little bit what I was making reference to in terms of sort of family succession.
Okay.
People who you own a business, either you're going to exit that business or the business is going to exit you.
Okay.
It might outlive you, but all of us are, going to find ourselves in a position where we're kind of wondering what's next.
Yeah.
And at that point, there's a lot of folks that own businesses, and they're great businesses to own, and they create great lifestyles, but they're not necessarily an asset that someone else would want.
Okay.
And then that's a bit of a dilemma, right? Because
Yeah.
you build this thing, you pour your heart and soul into it, and then you wake up one day and you think, I don't know what I'm going to do with this, and I don't know that anybody else wants this, because you didn't create it to be an asset that was easily transferred.
Yeah.
For example. And so we spend a lot of time understanding that desire. What is the desire for the business owner or that leader? Is it, hey, I want to preserve the legacy of what I've created. I want to create a platform for my children to participate in this. I want to elevate my leadership team and allow them to take ownership. I want to sell it and repurpose the money that's tied up in the business for generosity or for some other interest that I have. There's a lot of questions to ask, and they're logical and rational questions, but they're also really emotional questions.
Okay.
And so a big part of what an exit planner does is navigate that process with that business owner. And so I work in partnership with everybody from investment bankers to wealth advisors to tax experts, and try to pull all those things together in a way that helps realize the dream of the business owner.
Yeah. How long have you been doing this?
Well, I've been consulting for about 25 years, probably the last 7-8 years have really focused more on this family business
Yeah.
side of things.
Okay.
But, I'd love to tell you that's just what I do, but
Yeah.
I have big global multinational clients as well
Yeah.
that somehow I stumble into, and so it's a little bit all across the board.
Yeah. I think about this idea of exit planning and applying that to a personal life, right? And even like, start with the end in mind, right?
Mhm.
What would you even say to, guys that are in their 20s and 30s and outside of business and just looking at life in general? Like, what are some of the important things that you've learned through exit planning
Mm-hmm.
that we could apply to our lives in general?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't think I've been asked that particular question, so thanks for putting me on the spot. Uh, I'll tell you the thought that immediately popped in my
Yeah.
head. Maybe it's a strange thought in
Yeah.
response to your question. It's probably a more meaningful and maybe expected response. But the immediate thought that popped into my head was, you have to fall in love with the right things.
Okay.
And I always say you get to choose in life what you're going to be disappointed about. You can be disappointed that I didn't get to some level of accomplishment, or you'll be disappointed that I didn't achieve a goal or make a certain amount of money, or there's just a lot of things in life that we aspire to. And sometimes those are consciously decided. Sometimes those are unconsciously we just sort of find ourselves emotionally pursuing things that maybe they're not the things that we would have chosen deliberately.
Yeah.
But we're there.
Yeah.
And I think for business owners, a lot of times what I see is that business owners don't realize what they're in love with as it relates to their business and their professional lives.
Yeah.
And when you have sort of this maybe nebulous or soft understanding of what it means to sell my business, or what it means to transfer this to the next generation of family, or whatever that might look like, there's a sort of an axiom in the M&A world that you don't want to get a phone call the night before the transaction closes, because it's never good. It's always second thoughts and hesitation and uncertainty, because I think when we get close to those decisions and we realize my heart isn't where my head is, and it's because my intellectual brain said this is probably a good thing, and there's some reward on the other side of it, but then the emotional side of me says, you know what? I realized that what I love is actually love the work that I do. And I love the identity that it gives me. And so I was selling this because I was tired, and this represented a way out and rest. But now I realize I don't have a purpose beyond this. And so I never learned to cultivate a love for anything beyond just my professional life.
Yeah.
And I think starting to be really honest with ourselves about, what do I like about my work? What do I like about the dreams that I've set in front of myself?
Yeah.
And so being deliberate about that and recognizing you're going to have them.
Yeah.
A lot of people want to deny them, and they want to act like they're very mechanical in the way they approach things. But you're going to have things that you're excited about, and you're going to have other things that you do because they're necessities.
Yeah.
I think the more we really think purposely about, like, allowing myself to say, I love when I'm helping people, or I love when I can be the expert in the room.
Yeah.
Or I love when, I win the deal.
Yeah.
Right. And be okay with that.
Yeah.
I think that's revelatory of some sort of deeper God-given wiring that's in us.
Yeah.
To recognize you're going to have some instincts that are selfish and self-absorbed, and you're going to have other instincts that they just align to the way you're built.
Yeah. Well, I think an interesting thing with what you're talking about in some of these, I would call them intangibles, I would say, because so much of how we're built and wired and what we're pursuing or taught to pursue is a degree, it's a position, but we have not been taught about asking, what do I love about what I do? What is the feeling that I want on the other side of whatever it is, or an outcome, to help filter through like some of those choices, right? I say that asking because you didn't start the Walton Group when you graduated from college. I think there was some course correcting along the way, it seems like. And I think in any person's life that is and we'll get to this here in the book. But you've had to filter through your decision making to get here. So tell us a little bit about like what you started out doing when you graduated from school and like even getting here.
Yeah. Well, you call them course corrections. You might call them deviations.
Yeah.
I don't know. Corrections implies a real deliberateness.
Okay.
I'd love to say that I was deliberate in all these moves. I had this big master plan, and the truth is far from it.
Yeah.
But I think it goes back to a little bit of what I was saying about learn what you love about what you do. I started off when I got out of college. I was in corporate banking, and I enjoyed banking to a certain degree, but I felt like, I hate to say this, and if I'm talking to any bankers, I don't want to,
You might be, but that's okay.
I don't want this to sound like a critical comment, but on one hand, you're able to really help and you're able to serve business owners when you do that. And on the other side of it is everybody's money is green. And so you don't get to be inside the business you're serving.
Yeah.
You're somebody who sits outside the business and you bring a set of resources and some expertise and guidance to that person. And that's a very valuable thing to do. But for me, I just found myself, I felt like I was on the outside of the business looking in, and I wanted to have more involvement. I left and I got into high tech. I was working for a big global technology firm, and I enjoyed that, and it gave me a very broad sort of multi-dimensional experience. I got to sit in finance and sales and marketing and all these different places, and the final role I had there was an IT position, a technology role, and that was great because it gave me this broad exposure to the width and breadth of a lot of different aspects of what make businesses successful. And then for me, I think what I came to the conclusion with, this is a little bit about that, like, what did I love about what I did?
Yeah.
I didn't love finance, but I liked it. I didn't love operations, but I liked it, and so on. I think it was waking up one day and realizing that what I liked was the problems. What I liked was the broad, holistic, very macro view that I could have more as a generalist, as opposed to building a career as a specialist in a particular area. So for me, that worked. And then further iterations of that, I took a job helping run a technology firm here in town, and about a year and a half in, realized that the big company to the smaller company sort of transition, I wasn't as fulfilled, and it was time to really look at doing something different.
Yeah.
And I thought, what if I could take what I've done and translate that into some sort of consulting and create value for other organizations? And that led to this sort of natural evolution to, I love problem solving. And I think I'm a very good diagnostician. I'm pretty good at coming in and looking at a lot of things and sort of recognizing this is the heart of the issue.
Yeah.
Well, when you look at that sort of hodgepodge of things that I say that I do now, the common thread is these are all related to complex problem solving in very, let's call them loosely defined environments with a lot of different pieces and parts, and these aren't mechanical problems, and they're almost always related to people and deeper decision making. That's what I like to do. That's awesome. Where I really feel like I can be helpful to people. Is they're kind of staring down the face of something that's very daunting, and I can bring maybe a measure of objectivity that doesn't disregard all the softer elements of that.
Yeah,
it's what I enjoy.
Yeah, no, it's great. I think that this really is a great segue, I think, into this book you've written, Hidden in Plain Sight. And so tell us about your epiphany to even write this book. Like, how did it come to be?
Yeah, well, epiphany implies there was a lightning bolt moment or something really earth-shattering. I think it was just this slow growing recognition that early in my career, the things that had really interfered with me being successful were either my inability to identify and recognize what was happening in the people around me, or to do the same for myself. I would get emotionalized by something, would get under my skin, and I'd be angry or frustrated, and then I spent a lot of sideways energy trying to get myself under control.
Yeah.
Why am I so bad? Why did that bother me so much? Or why do I feel so poorly treated by someone? Or whatever it is. It's all the garbage of dealing with people that we all inevitably have to contend with.
Yeah.
And And then as I wrestled with how do I become more effective at that, I started to recognize that these are the guiding problems that I spend more time than not talking to clients that I serve about. And there are occasionally things like, hey, we need to make a decision about, we think we might want to go acquire another company. How do we think through that decision? How would we begin to start that process? Well, that's a technical problem that has some technical answers. And attached to that are some other things like motive and intent. But more often than when people would call me with a problem, it's my CFO and I are butting heads and we're not getting along. And I'm really frustrated and I don't know what to do. And so that's a human problem. And it might be motivated by, the circumstances of the business, but the ability to navigate that and to engage in that conversation has a lot more to do with these other soft skills that you need to possess, which is I have to have self-awareness and self-control, and then I have to have others' awareness and then a sensitivity to how I handle that, right? Well, that's how Daniel Goleman would define emotional intelligence, is really those 4 aspects of who you are. And if this is true for all of us and it's true for the people that I'm serving, when they get better at that, it's like we take a lot of the friction that exists in the way we deal with all the problems, and we just reduce that level of friction materially. So I think after conversation after conversation after conversation, I started thinking, okay, well, what are the linchpin issues that I just keep focusing on in these dialogues? What are these things that we keep coming back to again and again and again? And these were the kinds of issues. It was a lack of others' awareness. It was a tendency to define motive and intent in others' behavior. And that those things were causing conflict. They were interfering with all the rational and the intellectual parts of our decision process. We weren't seeing the outcomes we wanted because we weren't tending to these things. So then I thought, well, is there maybe an angle or a way to talk about it that's unique to what maybe other people have done? I didn't want to write a Me Too. So I wrote about what I talk about. And that was the impetus to try to write a book and maybe get the idea out there, and hopefully it would be useful to somebody.
You talk about people whispering in the book. How do you define what is a people whisperer?
I have to confess that the term people whisperer, I did 2 books prior to this particular book that I co-authored with some other folks, and I wrote myself. And if you've ever written a book or tried to write a book, it's a pretty onerous and daunting process. So I got smart this time, I think, and I hired a great ghostwriter to help me write it. He did such a great job that we put his name on the book, as unlike a lot of ghostwriters, because he really wanted to make sure that he was given credit for his contribution, which was enormous. But that aside, he really wanted to use this term people whisperer. That's not necessarily a term that I would use. I think it sounds a little self-aggrandizing. Oh, I'm a people whisperer. Like, I think I'm something special. And I would argue that it's really just this deliberate and attentive orientation towards listening beyond just the surface of a conversation with another person. And then seeing the best in that other person, right? Looking past what you might interpret as having negative intent or maybe ill purpose in someone's actions, behavior, or the words that they use towards you or whatever. And if I can discover what is more positive in their intent, and then I treat them as the person I think they might be when they're being their best self, what I more often than not discover is that's the person they were trying to be. It's sort of like if I say, hey, if you said, Randy, have you ever been rude? I would say, absolutely. I know I've been rude. I've been told by other people I've been rude. But I've never gotten up in the morning and said I'm a rude person. I never self-defined as a rude person. So my rudeness was typically a response to something that I thought justified my rudeness. Like, you've treated me badly, and I need to let you know you treated me badly. So if you say, well, you're a rude person, I would say, you don't know me at all. And you would be right, but I think I would be right. As opposed to if you say, listen, I understand this is frustrating for you, and I know you're trying to defend this important idea, then I would look at you and say, yeah, you nailed it, right? I'm not ill in intent, even if I behaved poorly. Well, very often when we're dealing with other people and they act in ways that we think, I don't even want to talk to this person right now, right? It's very rare that a person would self-define themselves as the villain. Right. We don't wake up as the villain. Now, I will tell you that those people do exist. They
There's
call
some
them
special,
sociopaths.
yeah.
And I've certainly run into them where
Yeah.
they're self-aware of maybe their own negative intent. But most of us, we're rude or we're curt or we're um, or whatever. Whenever we exhibit the worst parts of who we are,
Yeah.
we believe we're doing it for good reason.
Yep.
And if I can speak to you as that person, I mean, this is really the heart of the book. Is if I can speak to you as the person that um, that you could, like, the way I could explain your behavior that allows you to sit behind good intent. If I talk to you as that person, more often than not, what I discover is that was what you meant.
Yeah.
And then we have a very different relationship because
Right.
you feel seen and understood,
Yep.
respected and valued.
Yep.
And then I have a chance to then make a counterpoint to maybe we can have a healthy debate, but not a debate that's rancorous.
Yeah.
It's not filled with, and it's one thing for you to define my behavior.
Right.
And say, Randy, you acted rudely. It's another thing entirely for you to try to tell me why you think I did it.
Yeah.
You know, anytime you've had somebody tell you why you did something,
Right.
you know, they're usually wrong and it usually angers you. It's
Yeah.
never a good thing. Right?
Right.
You did that because you think you're smarter than me.
Right.
And it's like, oh, that's not why I did that. And then right now I think I'm smarter than you
Yeah.
because I'm mad that you said that to me. But
Right.
it's never a positive outcome, I think,
Yeah.
when we do that.
Yeah.
As opposed to you did that because you really have a heart to defend injustice
Yeah.
and you're trying to do that right now. And
Yeah.
then you'd say, well, that's exactly why I'm doing this.
Makes sense.
Makes sense?
Makes sense for sure. There is a concept in the book called signal versus noise.
Mm-hmm.
Really, I think it's a story that probably all of us can find ourselves in at some point in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that story. And really what I want to get to in this question is why our own self-awareness is so important to our ability in understanding others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the signal versus noise is such a great idea here. The story that I tell in the book is I had a really important client at one stage of my business that represented an enormous, and I mean, probably 80% of the revenue for the company was all coming through this one client relationship. We'd started doing a little bit of work and it had kind of bloomed into a much larger engagement. And so obviously it was very important for the preservation of all of our well-being to care for them well. And I ran into the CFO of the company one day in the hallway at their office, and he said very, very kind of negatively, it's like, oh, I need you to come by and see me. Can you come by and see me early next week? And it was like, yeah, sure. And he goes, yeah, sorry, it's not good. It's not good. And I was just like, this is not good. Oh my gosh, they're firing us.
Yeah.
They're not happy, or something's changed in the circumstances, but whatever it wasn't good.
Yeah.
And I came to realize that when I was a kid, that would often be the way I would get negative feedback. Parents just like, hey, we need to have a hard conversation. And it was never, we found some money, we think it's yours. It was always, you've let somebody down, you've made a mistake. It was always something negative, right? And I realized I'm kind of programmed to, you set me up with a conversation like that we're going to talk later. I don't assume good things. I assume the worst. And I get a lot of signals that maybe they're ambiguous or they're neutral signals, but I get a lot of signals in my life that I have a choice about how I'm going to interpret them. And in this particular instance, I interpreted it very negatively. Mm-hmm. And I went home and I told my wife, I'm like, I think this whole thing is risk. And I was very nervous about it. And I was anxious and I didn't sleep all weekend. I'm kind of racking my brain thinking, like, what am I going to hear? How's this going to go forward? And I was calling my wife as I was driving into the parking deck for this client. And I was like, okay, I'm going into this meeting right now. And she's like, I'm praying that things are okay. And, this is a stressful moment in our life, thinking that all this is going to go badly. And I walk in the door and he's like, oh, it's not good. It's not good. And I'm thinking, okay, just tell me, just fire me and let's just get started with it. And he said, yeah, our international operations are a mess. And the CEO and the board, they're all this pressure and da-da-da-da. And man, I need your help. Can you help me fix this? Could you go to London with us in 2 weeks? Yeah, sure. And I spent probably half my time for about 2.5 years going back and forth to the UK and dealing with other bigger global operations, and it was unbelievable. Some of the best learning experiences I've had, some of the best, I think, wins as a consultant came out of that, and it was very lucrative.
Yeah.
Economically, it was great. There was a great client to serve, and a great partnership, and it was just all the things that you really want to see happen in that world. But here I was walking around, unable to discern the signal because I get so consumed by the noise. I get so consumed by the negative piece of feedback and this thing coming and this can come in. And so I have a tendency to do that. I have a tendency to get lost in that and not de-emotionalize and then deal in and process with what's real right now.
Yeah.
And that's honestly, it's where people like me in the consulting world become useful because we're not as emotionally invested in it. So sometimes the conversation with me, I can say, okay, yeah, I see that's a possibility, but let's look at other reasons that this person might be wanting to have that conversation with you that don't involve the end of your business and then your whole family living in a car or whatever worst projection I had for that. And I think that it's very difficult to do that for ourselves because we've got skin in the game.
Yeah.
But signal and noise kinds of issues happen to us all the time. I mean, these are as simple as, a passing conversation with a spouse where, I say, hey, what are we doing for dinner? And my wife hears, you're not doing a good job. Because my wife, she's the cook. I don't cook. And if I cooked, we would starve. And she likes to. She's a really great cook. But I said that to her one day. And she interpreted something as, well, I was being critical, or I had an expectation that she wasn't satisfying. And I was like, where did that come from? And so then I said, hey, I realized I probably said that poorly.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, she responded sort of sharply to me, and I could easily come back and say, something equally sharp.
Yeah.
And I thought, no, that's not her intent. That's clearly something that I said wounded her. So I stopped and slowed down a little bit and said, hey, what did you hear me say? And she told me, I heard you say that, I need to get on top of this.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay. I'm sorry. That's my fault.
Yeah.
That's not what my intent was. I'm sorry I put you in a position to feel that way. And it's like, it disarmed the situation.
Yeah.
And we were very harmonious after that. But I mean, what is most of the sideways energy we spend in our life dealing with? It's these kinds of little things that happen all the time. And it's because we've spent years sort of accumulating these patterns and this way of recognizing what's happening in the world around us. And then we apply that pattern poorly to the next thing that comes in the door.
Yeah.
And boom.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you're saying that, and you're talking about our ability to kind of look back in the mirror and really see how we've been shaped. Whether you talk about curiosity and family origin in the book as well, which I think is a super interesting topic. And unless you've probably done some form of therapy, you've never really looked at family origin or thought about this. But what is that, to you? And how have you utilized your family origin in sort of sharpening your skill set? And I think there's probably some spiritual components to this too. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. There's one thing I wanted to pop in, just to pick off the last part of the conversation with, and it fits into this conversation about family of origin. And this is a statement that I tell a lot of leaders when I start working with them, is that being a healthy, whole, emotionally mature, sane person doesn't make you a good leader, but not being one will make you a bad leader. So you've really, people will say, hey, I want to become a better leader. I want to run a better company. It's like, okay, well, we're going to go take this journey back into you, right? Because if we don't do that, we're never really going to get to the heart of the things that could potentially interfere. If we can eliminate those concerns or mitigate, I'm going to never say eliminate, because we all are always going to have stuff that we're always being formed. But if I can reduce the intensity of that and the way it impacts your experience, I set you up, I think, to be much more likely to be an effective leader, right? Because then you're not managing out of your own negative emotions and things like that. And so the concept of family of origin really speaks to this idea that all of us, through our collective experiences through our life, we've formed these patterns, we've shaped the way our brain perceives reality through that. And you think about it, the human brain is really at its heart a pattern recognition engine. If you don't have evidence of that, I'll give you one example that I think highlights this. When you when you just say you commute from your home to work every day, and the first time you make that drive, especially if it's a lengthy drive, you sort of think through what's the best way to make it here in a timely way, the most peaceful, whatever, however you're trying to define a good drive to work and back. And you think about it. And when you do that, you're using a part of your brain you would call systematic thinking. It's a very deliberate, intentional way of I'm thinking through my choices and decisions. Well, then, later, after you've done this for days and weeks, whatever, it becomes very automatic. And that's called a heuristic. So your brain forms a pattern of expectation, and you get in the car and you just start driving. You don't process it. This is why when we move homes, all of a sudden we find ourselves driving back to our old house, sometimes unconsciously or whatever. But we've all had days like at the end of a stressful day, we're driving home at the end of the day, and you have that moment where you pull up in the driveway or whatever, and then you have that like, I don't even remember the drive.
Yeah.
Like you realize that the conscious part of your brain, the thinking systematic part of your brain was engaged in other things, but your heuristic was running until you had something interrupt that, right? It's a crash up ahead or a construction site or something that, oh boy, hold on. And now I've got to stop and I got to bring back that systematic thinking. Well, why? Well, because my brain is an inherently lazy device. And what I mean by that is the brain, to be efficient, your brain is the most calorically expensive part of your body, right? For 5% of your body's mass, it consumes over 20% of your body's calories. And so I think that our God-given design is to be efficient. So I decide things, and once I've decided things and I'm pretty rooted that that's the way it works, I don't re-examine that because it would be really calorically expensive to do that all the time. Now, I grew up in a home, and I grew up in a home where there were certain patterns of behavior. There's certain ways that we dealt with conflict. There's certain ways that we processed who we were, our role in the world, the relationship between a parent and child. All these things get shaped, and we don't go back and re-examine them most of the time. We just hold on to that heuristic that this is just normal. And so I came into a marriage where, in my family growing up, if you had conflict, you hit it hard and fast, and then you were over it. And so, you were cheating. My brothers and I yelling at each other. You were cheating at the game we were playing, and I was like, I was not. And we kind of snap at each other, and then it'd be like, whatever. And it's like, oh, you want to go kick the soccer ball? It was just we were over it, right?
Yeah.
My wife came from a home where that was considered very rude to be so overt.
Yeah.
So you expressed your anger and your frustration a little bit more indirectly.
Yeah.
So we get married, and she's unhappy with me one time, and I'm sure it was very well warranted on her part, but she was frustrated with me, and so she's trying to let me know without being what she would have considered too rude and offensive by getting in my face and saying it. So, she's kind of rattling around and doing stuff, and you could just say she's angry, whatever. And I was like, you're making a lot of noise. Can you stop and try to watch the game or whatever it was?
Yeah.
And you can imagine how that ended.
Yeah.
And but it was because she had a family of origin pattern sort of set in her, and I had one, and we brought it together and we formed a new one. And doubtlessly, my kids are grown now, but doubtlessly they are running into the same thing. Two of my daughters are married, and I'm sure in their marriage they run into the same thing where their husbands. I have all girls, and so those two daughters, their husbands are probably looking at them going, why do you do that the way you do it? That's so weird. And they're like, well, that's the way we did it in our house. That's normal. Yeah. And I'm sure those sons-in-laws look at me and think that was not normal. But it's normal for me. It's normal for us. And so patterns or family of origin doesn't just refer to our family though, because our friend groups, our education, our experiences in teams and sports, our jobs, our bosses, the cultures of companies that we're in, all accomplish the same thing. When I worked at NCR, we had a culture that was very direct, and it was very to the point. We would have screaming matches sometimes across the table at each other over some big issue, and we'd get to the end of it, and then we'd be like, hey, everybody want to go to lunch? And we'd go to lunch, and it was sort of recognized that was the intent to get to the best answer. Yeah. And then I went to a company where if you had behaved that way, that was really, really disrespectful behavior. And so same family of origin kind of conundrum, right? I came in sort of with a pattern of what a healthy meeting looked like. Yeah. And then I was seen as this, very aggressive person. Yeah. I think that people now wouldn't see me as that. But that's the way I came across. Right. Because I come from a place that's just how you did it. Yeah. So we all have that tendency to fall into those patterns. And I think that examination, that capacity to be very deliberate and very purposeful to ask yourself what's behind
Yeah.
your actions and behaviors. It's one of the more critical aspects of how we become an effective leader,
Yeah.
because we're just not managed by something that's happening unconsciously.
Yeah. That makes complete sense. And I think this is, it's really one of the main reasons why I really wanted to get you on an episode of this podcast, because there's so much transcendence in this topic and what good communication, how it can cover beyond work and into regular relationships. So our audience, primarily 20 to 30 something guys, I think our tendency with guys is it's pretty difficult to go deeper than the surface level. So whether through the book or just strategies that you've employed in your life, where would you encourage us to start when it comes to going beyond the surface?
Yeah. Well, so let's put this in a spiritual context, right?
Yeah.
Because you mentioned that earlier, that even this family of origin, that one of the more important aspects of understanding our eternal identity, like our bigger identity, is it should, if we really grasp that, it liberates us from a little bit of the stinking thinking that we can pick up from the world about who we are and what we are owed and what we need to do in order to protect ourselves and get what we want and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I think we need to start with that inward look, that inward journey, right? Which, if you're like a lot of guys, that sounds like the least attractive thing. Like, you want me to sit around and talk about my feelings? I'm not going to do that. I'd rather just, like when I'm a little kid, I don't want to do that. I just want to, throw a baseball at your head or something because I'm angry because I'm just a kid. But I think we need to self-examine that. And then I think the second part of it is we need to learn to develop a curiosity about others. Now, if you're solely doing this because you feel this responsibility, this obligation to do it, I think that feels pretty burdensome. I would make the other argument, though. I think this is about making our lives feel a lot easier. I think this is about taking friction and misunderstanding and conflict and all these things that we deal with all the time that are just the irritations of life, and helping them not to loom so large for us. So if you're a younger single guy and you're out on your own, you're being independent, right?
Yeah.
You get to sort of pick and choose from your past experiences to sort of define what your life's going to look like.
Yeah.
And then you think, hey, I want to date. I want to pursue a relationship with somebody else.
Yeah.
Right? And you do that, and all of a sudden you run into this being who has a different pattern of what's normal.
Right.
And now it's like I'm jumping through all these hoops and I'm adapting to all these things to pursue this goal of this relationship that I want, and I'm struggling with, gosh, is this too much work? Is this too much that I have to deal with? That sort of thing. But I think it's missing the point. Let me use an analogy, right?
Yeah.
If, let's say that you have a piece of software that you use to do your job.
Yeah.
And that piece of software requires you to have certain inputs and certain procedures that you do in order to get the software to accomplish the thing that you need it to do, right? You could come in and say, that's a ridiculous set of keystrokes. That's a ridiculous set of instructions or steps or actions that I need to take in order to do this. It should be so much simpler. And you might be right. But you're not going to get your job done trying to force your pattern of expectation on the software, because the software is just the software.
Right.
So if I'm going into a relationship with other people, whether that's peers and friends, or if we're talking about in a dating and in pursuit of marriage kind of relationship, I can't go in and then look at this other person's behaviors and say, well, that's completely irrational. It's like, look, this is what's required, right? And for you to keep trying to put this set of inputs to this other person that you think, based on your way of seeing the world, should be the right way, well, they're not going to be happy and you're not going to be happy.
Yeah.
And then if you see that as brokenness or failure, you're missing the point.
Yeah.
And you're going to end up lonely when it's all said and done.
Yeah.
Or you can recognize, okay, that's how this person needs me to talk to them.
Yeah.
And so my responsibility towards you is to do two things. Is to, number one, to demonstrate deep curiosity about you.
Okay.
And if you can't cultivate curiosity, you'll never do this. You'll just apply a very simple one-dimensional label to explain another person's behavior, like they're crazy. that person's crazy, right? And once you put the crazy label on somebody,
Yeah.
what's great about that is you're free.
Yeah.
You don't have any work to do, right? They're crazy, ergo, I'm not crazy. So all the problems sit right here. And it's a shame they can't figure out how to not be crazy
Yeah.
based on my point of view. They're probably doing the same thing to you, right? Because we're both crazy from the other person's perspective.
Right.
And so if I can become curious and say, okay, if I can understand what's motivating you and driving you, right, I can go a lot deeper than that. I can look beyond the surface and sort of ask myself, not just what did you do, but maybe why did you do it?
Yeah.
And I think that even if we don't like deep introspection, that others oriented expectation can help us to look for the pattern that's really there, can look for more.
Yeah.
And it's just like I'm just learning the operating system
Mm.
for this other person. And if I want what I want, I don't mean that in a nefarious, like I'm just going to get what I want way.
Yeah.
But if I want to have a healthy relationship with you,
Yeah.
I need to learn
Yeah.
what you need from me. And then, you have children and they grow up in your household,
Yeah.
all exposed to the same things. And guess what? They all have their own little operating system. It has its own set of rules.
Yeah.
And I don't talk to my daughters all exactly the same way because they have different ways that they feel valued and appreciated.
Yeah.
So I better be good at that. I better learn for all the roles that I have to play in life.
Yeah.
How to demonstrate that curiosity towards the other person. And by the way, if you have a selling role in your job, it'll make you a better salesperson.
Yeah.
If you have a role where you have to influence or challenge other people in your job, it'll make you better at that. If you negotiate, it'll make you better. If you have a boss, it'll make you better with your boss. If you have employees, it'll make you better with the employees. I mean, every part of your life improves by virtue of this effort.
Yeah.
But it's not as much a skill as I would refer to it as it's a muscle. So the trick is, how do I exercise the muscle?
Yeah.
How do I force myself with deliberateness just to do it consciously? If you've ever traveled to a place where they don't speak your language, it's mentally stressful. Like you're walking around, you don't know the words for anything, and it's just hard just to even navigate.
Yeah.
But very quickly, it goes from this noise to signal, right? You start to pick out some key words. The pattern recognition engine starts to pick up on things like bathroom and hotel and water and just really essential survival kind of words, right? You start to pick out of the noise that's around you.
Yeah.
Well, why? Well, because my survival depends on it. And by the way, you sleep well every night because you realize like your brain's been working harder than it normally does.
Yeah.
Right. If we can learn to do that with people, what happens is we start to pick out those little pieces of signal from the noise. You start to pick out when this person says this to me, what they're saying is, I don't feel heard. When this person says this to me, what they're saying is, I don't feel respected, right? And then if I can do that, if I can learn to deliberately work that muscle, what will happen is that I'll start to form a new pattern.
Yeah.
And I'll pick up on it really fast. Really quickly, I'll go, you know what? I'm sorry. I said that in a way that I bet came off wrong to you. Let me adjust what I meant. Let me say this differently.
Yeah.
Well, you might say, I don't want to have to do that. Well, you don't have to do that.
Yeah.
You just don't get to have a relationship if you don't want to do that. Or you can figure out how to cultivate this muscle and it just becomes unconscious.
Yeah.
And then you do it without even thinking about it. And so that's really where we want to go with that.
Yeah.
Is the forced exercise of that muscle. So if somebody says this sounds very onerous and hard, so you don't have to boil the ocean on this.
Yeah.
Just start with little things. Just start with the next time you're sitting across from somebody who acts in a way that you think, what? If the word crazy pops in your mind, ask yourself, how could they see their behavior from their point of view that would actually make sense? And that alone will help push you down a path of thinking differently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, man, there's a lot to this conversation's resetting my brain about communication. If you're a single guy and you're listening to this, I don't know if Randy, you had the idea of writing this as a relationship book, but I do think there's some really great practical things that just sort of cover all of the different relational dynamics of just understanding people by communicating better. And I think so much of communicating and what I'm hearing you say today is also about listening. I kind of want to land the plane on, this is going to be a broad question, but thinking about marriage and fatherhood in particular, just what are some of the things that you would say to encourage, the guys in marriages, and then also young dads when it comes to communicating with their kids. What are some of the things that have helped you along the way that you've learned about now with a couple kids that are married and looking
Mhm.
back at some of this? Talk to us for a second about those two areas, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Well, I'll make a maybe a silly but slightly provocative statement that I think you have to learn to love people's weirdness. Because anything that's just not our way
Yeah,
is weird. You know, it's not normal,
yeah,
so to speak. And I think if we want to be good at relationships, and by the way, there's not if you have a life with no relationships, you're a hermit, right? And there's no part of life where you can completely insulate yourself from that obligation to interact and deal with other people.
yeah,
So all of life is relationships, but the most important relationships, the ones we should care the most about, are those marriage relationships, those parent relationships. And I was hanging out last night. My wife and I watched the grandkids. We have 3 grandkids, and we're having fun learning their languages. What do they want? How do they like to be talked to? What makes them feel appreciated and valued? And it's easy when it's grandkids and you love them and you're in this position to want to invest that effort to try to navigate that. And it would be completely ludicrous for me to say, I'm the grandfather here. I set the tone. You learn to adapt to me.
mm,
And yet, a lot of us go into the world with that attitude like, this is the way I am, and you have to learn to adapt to me. And if you do that, or if you're like, this is my castle and I'm the king,
yeah,
right? You might be right, but you'll be lonely.
yeah,
Years ago, I had a conversation with Andy Stanley, and he shared an interesting point, and it's really stuck with me as it applies to a lot of things in life. And he
yeah,
said, in every relationship that you have with other people, there's one of two roles that you get to play.
mm,
You can love them, or you can try to change them. And God lets you pick the one you want to play, and He takes the other one. And so in my marriage, I think for a lot of my marriage, my goal was to change my wife, to fix all these weird things in her that
yeah,
came from her family of origin. And God was just loving her.
mm,
And when I decided I'm just going to love her and I'm going to learn to love the weirdness, so to speak. Now, my wife's not weird at all. You know my wife;
yeah.
she's much more normal than me. But
I would agree.
but thanks for that. But when you learn to love the weirdness, you learn to love the uniqueness about people, and you learn to really embrace the fact that okay, they're different, but I'm cool with that. Let me try to understand it.
Yeah,
Right? Here's what happens: is all of a sudden I think that things that I was desiring to see maybe shift and change in her started changing on their own.
mm,
And what I didn't have is I didn't have faith
mm,
in that bigger eternal perspective that God was actually working in her life.
yeah,
I had faith that I had to be the one to do it, or it wasn't going to happen.
mm,
And so sometimes what feels like passiveness on our part is really just trust in God's sovereignty to move in and through our circumstances. So as a parent, as a spouse, all these things, it's really about us learning to let go and cultivate a level of trust. But I can't just let go and be angry. I have to let go and be loving.
mm,
And when I do that, what I've done is I've taken the role that God's saying, hey, if you'll just love this person, I'm more than capable of helping to bring about change in this
yeah,
person. And guess what? My wife did that with me.
yeah,
And I probably changed a lot more, and she probably had a lot more fix as it came to me. But I think it's a great place to end, because if we're going to do that, if we're really going to love people,
yeah,
we got to really want to love people, which means we have to learn to look at them with this just genuine curiosity, so
yeah,
that it's what's about you that's not just like me.
yeah,
That's what's really great here.
yeah,
And I just want to figure out what it is. I want to figure out, what's behind what you're doing, and to know that overwhelmingly you're doing something, even if I don't like it, for a reason that from your point of view
mm,
is a good reason. And I need to figure that out.
yeah. It's a great place to end. But before we end, I'm going to ask you actually to, if you don't mind, just lead us in a prayer for our listeners who are watching, and hopefully your heart stirred uh, to be a better communicator, to be a better listener in all of your relationships, whether at work, at home,
Mhm.
whether you're single, you're raising kids, no matter what season of life you're in. I hope this conversation was encouraging to you guys. Thank you again for joining. But why don't you close this out in a
Yeah, I'd
word of
love
prayer?
to. Lord, thank you so much that you love us so amazingly, Lord. And none of this today comes from anybody but you. You're just the author of all wisdom, and you modeled this for us, Lord. You took the step towards us, And you do that again and again through Jesus. You come to us. You come towards us, and you're asking us to follow the example of what you did, to come towards us, and asking us to move towards others in the same way. So, Lord, I pray for strong marriages. I pray for softened hearts. I pray for curious minds that learn to celebrate and love the parts of others that are unique and different. And Lord, that we'd recognize that this is one of those things that when we work on it, it makes our life easier. It is not one more thing to manage. This is one of the ways that we get to open up peace and relationship and connection. And Lord, thank you for doing that for us. Thank you for loving us that way, and for giving us the model. So we ask your blessing, Lord. We ask your guidance and direction for all that are listening today. In Jesus' name, amen.
The book is called Hidden in Plain Sight. Can get it anywhere?
You can get it where all good books are sold.
Okay.
Amazon.
Awesome. It's awesome. Randy, thank you.
Thank you.
I would encourage you, and I want to invite you to our next event, which is December 4th. It's coming up here very fast. We have an amazing speaker, Jeff Francoeur, formerly of the Atlanta Braves, is going to be speaking that night. He is a broadcaster now, and is after baseball, and so you're probably familiar with him from that standpoint. So it's going to be awesome. Come out, bring your friends. Only thing that we're asking you to do is to sign up. Go to purposeontap.com. There's all the information there. We're capped out at 250 guys that night. Spots are filling fast, so I would encourage you, if you haven't signed up, sign up right now and bring a friend. The other thing I want to mention is it's the end of the year. If you do know about Purpose on Tap, if you've been to the events, you know that a lot goes into it. We want to just invite any person who has been blessed by the ministry, loves what we're doing and where we're going, especially with things like this podcast, as an opportunity to give. So it's end of the year. If you feel so inclined, we'd love any partnership that you have means to do. It's all welcomed. So purposeontap.com again, purposeontap.com. You can go give there as well.